Your breath is that constant, and it's always with us. And regardless of the situation that's happening on the outside, you can always tune into your breathing. But the time to tune into the breath is not when a situation happens. The time to tune into the breath is now.
Welcome everybody to the first Manava podcast. Let's just be transparent, Gareth. We're sitting at a coffee shop after doing some Oxygen Advantage training with the Franklin Bulls basketball team.
Yep.
So life is in real time, we're in real time, and we thought we'd just make it real time. It's a real time podcast. So in real time, the funny thing is Patrick's conversation was a while ago now.
Yeah.
It was our first recording.
Yep.
But for those who don't know Patrick McKeown is, well, how would you describe him? He's the kind of, the yin to the yang of Wim Hof, I would say. He brings the science to the feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, he's obviously into feeling too, but like people were trying to, even today, the guys at the Bulls were like, what's the difference between Wim Hof and Patrick? And it's something I think we're all trying to kind of guide through. So look, it's how's this journey been for you, Gareth?
It's been really good. It's interesting. It's something I can really sink my teeth into. It's something that I'm passionate about. Human performance. However you construct it is centered around breathing. Whether it's being calm for a meeting, being calm for a presentation, breathing better in the the time of battle, going to war, like these guys are going to, they're giving it their all. Getting them to breathe better is something that interests me.
Well, and the opposite exists too, right? Like anxiety, fear, it's breath-based as well.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
Just we only acknowledge one of them in life unconsciously.
That's right, and that's kind of how I explained it to the guys, in that the Wim Hof was a stressor. Thank you.
And the latte.
Awesome.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
The Wim Hof is a stressor in that it forces you to controlled, of course, but it forces you to hyperventilate, which, as I explained to them, is not, as athletes, not where we want them to be. Short, sharp, quick breaths is not what they need to be doing when they're on the court or off the court. When they're recovering, we want them to be breathing calmer. Thank you.
This podcast's got ADR as well. Is it that, that you can hear things? Hear slurping and eating. Look, so if it's your first time here, it's purposefully like this, where Gareth and I are sussing each other out, we're sussing this business out, we are bringing breath work, I would say, with a handful of people to New Zealand and trying to really implement it deep. So we're working hard at that, and this is one of our ways to explore together. I guess the luxury we don't have is when you're dealing with athletes, you can't really trial things then.
No.
And so this is part of a long-term thing for me, someone who doesn't come from human performance, is to understand what are the ins and outs, where can we push the boundaries, and because we talk about mental health and we don't really know what that means. It's just a word given for something, but it's a conglomerate, as we've talked about many times. So the podcast is a bit more exploratory, where Gareth and I can touch base with everyone. It's definitely a podcast for those who are interested in breathing, but also those who are experts and non-experts. This is this is what Gareth and I both represent, is the pursuit of understanding and learning. So welcome to the Manava Breathing Podcast. You'll be hearing Patrick McKeown. He's taking over in just a second. I actually can't remember exactly what we talked about, but I can damn sure bet it's about nasal breathing.
And, we talked about breathing.
And just, getting to know the man behind the growing myth, right? Because that's the thing, is that Patrick's already become this, this guy, and he's not Wim. He's doing it his way. And
well, the funny thing is, and that'll sort of lead into the other podcast that we did with James Nestor. People know who James Nestor is, but they don't know who Patrick McKeown is. And obviously, James was on Joe Rogan.
Yep.
And he referenced Patrick.
That's right.
And Patrick is obviously, he's the foremost expert at the moment in nasal breathing.
Awesome.
And nobody knows who he is for the most part. Those that know breathing and those that are nerds about it like we are, get it and know who he is. But for the most part, the general public wouldn't know him if they fell over him.
Sweet, what an intro. Here's the person you don't know. Unless you're here for Patrick and then you know him because there's hours of him online. Enjoy this conversation, team. Just so you know, Manava Breathing is a business. It's a professional business where we offer breathwork coaching for human performance. We offer breathwork coaching for functional breathing. They're all tied in. It is the one and the same. The nose is the key. It's just the delivery method. So you can learn more, www.manavabreathing.com. We present to you Patrick McKeown. Enjoy.
There was two Buteyko papers published in the New Zealand Medical Journal in 2003 and 2004 by a Dr. Patrick McKeown, H-U-G-H. He looked at children and he looked at adults with asthma. These children and adults, they typically had 50% less need for medication after breathing retraining. Doctors started writing all of this criticism into the journal. And it was Dr. James Bartley who wrote a letter. And he said, before you start pouring vitriol, in the heat or whatever on this, let's ask, what is the Buteyko method about? He said it's about breathing in and out through the nose. It's about normalizing minute ventilation. And it's about improving the biochemistry of breathing. And he says the Buteyko method mightn't have all the answers, and it doesn't have all the answers. And he said it's emphasizing shallow breathing, and we know that the greatest concentration of blood is in the lower lobes of the lungs. But he says the Buteyko method, it raises more questions than it answers. But this is good, and this is why we should be exploring it. And science is all about exploration with an open mind, not being closed-minded. But you're correct. A lot of this information, even though, we've seen benefits. Like I've worked with 8,000 individuals, 8,000 people direct face-to-face, and we didn't get results with 100%. Of course we don't. This needs compliance, and you'll never get 100% results. But overall, it was very helpful for many of these people. And yet there was very little uptake with asthma societies, a lot of negativity, and that's fine. And I suppose the way I looked at it was, I've only a certain amount of energy in the day, and I want to direct my energy to whoever is more receptive to it. And I never want to waste my energy. So if somebody says to me, well, they're happy with what they're doing, that's absolutely fine. But if somebody says to me, there could be some merit in that, let's learn it, and that's fine too. And I think that's the best thing. And that was one thing about it, over the years. And you'll find that in the sports world as well. You will find some people who will be closed. And that's why I think a lot of the time they're coming with their own preconceptions, and they're thinking that this is something that's new age for hippies, with the guys running around with I often use the term tree huggers, or the open sandals, the leather sandals with the open sandal brigade. But it's totally different, because when you see who's doing this, there's Olympic athletes doing it, there's SWATs doing it. We have military instructors bringing it into practice. And now I think the best research in terms of what we do in terms of recovery is heart rate variability. And I don't think anybody can deny that. And we can tie what we're doing. Heart rate variability biofeedback is just a measurement. The real question is, how do we improve it? Well, the exercises that we're doing. And then the other exercises, there's studies coming out from Wuran's Paris 13 University, breath hold training, putting the body into a hypoxic, hypercapnic state, disturbing the blood acid-base balance, forcing the body to make adaptations, improving the buffering capacity inside the muscle compartment, delaying lactic acid and fatigue. Even that one single thing could be beneficial.
Yeah. So this is all my language. I love this stuff.
I'm recording, by the way, Gareth.
Yeah. This is the nerdy part of me that really enjoys this kind of stuff. So yeah, you're definitely speaking my language, Patrick. Maybe not Will's language, but definitely my language.
And I think, Art, the thing is about it as well, you become a little bit more confident when you know the science behind it.
Yeah.
Like for me to say to somebody, I want you to practice this breathing technique. If I don't know what's behind it, I don't feel comfortable in teaching it.
Yeah.
But how many breathing instructors are out there teaching breathing exercises? They don't know what's behind it. They don't know what's happening. They're just following, a kind of a tradition, and they're following a tradition which may have changed over the years. And I think there has been a lot of misinformation about breathing. And maybe this is why the general population are often put off.
What's your take on the medical profession and things like the care professions in physiotherapy? Why aren't they looking at the breath work in terms of a construct, in terms of fixing somebody rather than tape and medication?
Physiotherapists have been they've been pretty good. They've been involved in a number of clinical trials. In the UK and also in Ireland, we've worked with quite a few physiotherapists. So respiratory rehabilitation done by physios, they have really, to some degree, they've embraced nasal breathing, and they've also embraced the biochemical aspect of it. Now, medical doctors, number one is they don't have the time. Number two, breathing has never been on their curriculum. Number three, they don't understand anything about it. And number four, they are trained mainly in pharmaceutical intervention.
Yep.
You look at, for example, New Zealand, you've got one of the highest asthma rates in the world. And if you read a book by Neil Pearce, I think is the author, it's called The Phenotryl Story. It's about medication that was prescribed in New Zealand called phenotryl. And the death rate from asthma was increasing dramatically in the 1970s and 1980s. And this guy Pearce, P-I-E-R-C-E, I think is his surname, he was an epidemiologist. He asked the question, is this drug causing the increased death rate? And he concluded it was. And he notified the various health authorities. But the pharmaceutical company producing the drug started a backlash against Pearce, discounting and discrediting his claims. And Pearce was very, with so much resistance, he was wondering then, well, his whole livelihood, his career, his reputation could be at stake because he is getting so much pressure. And you can imagine the marketing might of a multinational company against one individual. They really don't stand a chance until the New Zealand Minister for Health, he said, if there's a link here, there's only one way to find out. Let's withdraw the drug from the market for 6 months. And he withdrew the drug from the market for 6 months, and the death rate from asthma in New Zealand reduced dramatically when the drug was withdrawn. And then they knew there was a link there. So, the health system really needs a major overhaul. Yeah. And we also need to think that egos should be put aside. Breathing is not, if you're a medical doctor and if you're trained, you are trained to be, looking into the most sexy and, all of this mind-boggling stuff. Like, you're not going to spend 7 years or 8 years studying and then turn to breathing. That doesn't fit with the story that you have about yourself. So so my whole take on this is that this is going to be driven from the population upwards. And that's why back in 2003 and 4, I started writing the first book, because I said, I'll never change the health system. I can't change it. But what I can change is I can get it out to the hands of the population. So I wrote one book, Asthma Free Naturally, back in 2003. And I kept on writing books. And I wrote 8 or 9 books then. 2010, I put out 3 of them, or I think 3 of them. Anxiety Free, Sleep with Buteyko, Buteyko Meets Dr. Mew. Different books, because then I can get it out there. And at least in a book, somebody will take a chance. It's only about $15 or so. And it's $15 that, yeah, if there's something in it. And the whole thing here is when we're teaching breathing exercises, get people to experience the difference, and then they start to understand it.
Even, friends that have done cognitive behavior therapy, all that kind of stuff, like it comes back to, we spoke with a mental performance coach prior to the tire flip that we did. And breathing was part of the thing that he's a neuro-linguistics practitioner, a very good one. And he got us breathing for, to regulate our calm and get into the right state. And it was nasal, 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, which was fantastic. And just kind of think, in terms of that cognitive behavior, rather than a lot of medical practitioners writing a script and going, here's some chemicals, here's Patrick's book, here's James Nestor's book, here's, go and read that, and rather than take the pills, or, I'm really interested in mental health, particularly. I've done a lot of work with people in that mental health sphere, and we've got one of the highest, if not the highest, rates of teen suicides, youth and teen suicides in the developed world. And there has to be some sort of correlation between anxiety, mouth breathing, and depression and suicide.
And just quickly before we jump in, Patrick, like even the people here, and I won't name names, and we'll say people do a really great job advocating for mental health, whatever that means, better mental health, but no one's specific. No one talks about calming your breathing calms your mind. That's what you told me last time, that you're not ready to have a conversation about suicide if you can't calm the mind. That's right, eh?
This, Will and Garrett, this should be taught in schools. Education is teaching children how to think, but it's not teaching children how to stop thinking. And we as a Western society have absolutely become living in our heads, completely stuck in our heads, and thought after thought after thought, and not being able to control thought activity, not being able to step out of it, not being able to create some space between thinking. And that's very important. And one way to do that is by focusing on the breath. Now, oftentimes in mental health issues, there's been a failure to look at the quality of sleep. And I use the example of people coming into me, and they come in with, mental health issues, depression, etc. And I ask them, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? And they tell me they wake up feeling exhausted. And I said, well, has anybody ever asked you about your sleep quality? And typically the answer is no. And it's because maybe the healthcare professional is assuming that the person is the person is exhausted because they are depressed. But maybe it's the exhaustion which is feeding into the depression. And the other thing about cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't necessarily, unless you've got a well-trained therapist, but CBT doesn't train or change respiratory physiology. So say, for example, we have, you've got your client going to learn CBT, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But if that client is breathing faster and upper chest breathing and irregular breathing patterns with an overly strong sensitivity to carbon dioxide, that they feel air hunger, they feel suffocation, there's something physically going wrong there that needs to be addressed, because their breathing is off, and CBT won't change their breathing patterns. And this has been written about 10 years ago. So I think there's a lot we can do with mental health. I think the whole space of breathing, and again, it's that whole idea that, you're stressed, go and take a deep breath. And, this idea that more air is better is really something that needs to be untangled. I understand people might be asking about, say, the Wim Hof technique. The Wim Hof technique is a stressor to cause a reset. But when we're working with people, we need to look at how are they breathing every day? How do they breathe during sleep, during physical exercise, during rest? Like somebody comes into me and I'm working with them. It's not about how they breathe when they're with me. It's how they breathe when they leave me. And that's really the key. And I think Also, when we look at the potential of the breath, can you imagine a simple breathing technique that can open up the nose, open up the lungs, improve blood circulation, improve oxygen uptake in the blood, improve oxygen delivery, protect the entire upper airways. Nasal breathing engages the diaphragm. Greater amplitude of the diaphragm is connected with the motions, but also connected with the upper airway dilator muscles during sleep. Nasal breathing, if your nose is stuffy, you are 1.8 times more likely to have a sleep problem. So people come in with hay fever, they come in with asthma, they're chronic mouth breathers, they have a stuffy nose. They don't just have a stuffy nose, they're tired and they're stressed because mouth breathing is engaging fast upper chest breathing. And then we know, so from the biochemical point of view, it's all about improving blood flow and oxygen delivery based on simple medical norms. From a biomechanical point of view, it's about gauging amplitude of the diaphragm. Diaphragmatic breathing is essential for functional movement. Functional movement is essential for reduced risk of injury.
Yep.
And then cadence breathing or resonance breathing to stimulate the vagus nerve, to increase the sensitivity of the baroreceptors, to influence the autonomic nervous system. There's so much we can do with the breath, but the foundation is nasal breathing. So I agree. I would love to see this in mental health.
I'd love to see it in schools, and you did touch on that, Patrick, in terms of teaching it to kids. And it's a conversation I had with Will and a couple of others in this kind of sphere of, 5 years ago, schools were reluctant to talk about mental health to kids because, well, if you talk about it, the kids are going to be thinking about it. And yet we have one of the highest rates of suicide in the developed world. These kids don't have anybody to talk to, and yet their mates are killing themselves. Breathing seems to be, obviously, it's not the same, but there's a link there, right? This is something that we should be teaching the next generation, so there's less asthma sufferers, so there's less anxious children turning into anxious adults, depressive children turning into depressive adults. It's all about kids. A lot of us, as you were saying earlier on when we spoke, that you can teach an 80-year-old to do it. A lot of old dogs you can't teach new tricks to. They're very set in their ways, but the kids are sponges.
Yeah.
This is setting them up for a lifetime of achievement or failure. I think that's the way forward, and working with a lot of communities around teaching children to be able to do this and go through all their life. There's one part where you talk about in one of your videos about increasing focus, mental clarity and focus, just by how many children suffer with lack of focus and ADHD in class.
Gareth,
are those kids mouth breathers?
Very often they are, and I know, Will, you probably want to step in. There was a study conducted by Karen Bonnock back in 2011 in the UK, and she looked at 11,000 children. And she concluded from looking at 11,000 children over, I think it was an 8-year period, that children who had sleep disorder breathing, by age 5, if they weren't treated by age 5, by age 8, they had a 40% increased need for special education needs. 40% increase really. So we think about ADD and ADHD. As an adult, I was waking up feeling exhausted every morning in high school, every morning going into university. And we are supposed to be able to focus. And our intelligence, society grades our intelligence by what we score in an exam. But nobody is considering the sleep quality of the child who is required to perform this exam. Many of these children, 25 to 50% of studied children, persistently mouth breathe. These kids are going to be tired. They won't have the focus. They won't have the concentration. And then frustration sets in. And then they don't score well in exams. And with the pressure put on kids and pressure from parents and pressure on society, to go and get a university education, etc., and nobody is looking at it. It's so bizarre the more you go down this path, like last year we put out a breathing course for free. It's all of the exercises are out there for free for kids. So I had my daughter in my house, and we put her through all of the little exercises. And then any child can just go in on YouTube, breathing exercises, children, Patrick McKeown, and they can see 8 or 9 different breathing exercises, calming exercises, slow diaphragmatic breathing, the importance of nasal breathing, running with the mouth closed, doing breath holding. So it's pretty much the oxygen advantage for kids.
Yeah.
Patrick, have you been following any of the stuff David Blaine's been doing with his balloon to the sky? I just wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
No, I haven't. I live a very isolated life here. I live absolutely in the middle of nowhere, and I very seldom do I hear the news. So if people ask me what's going on with COVID, I haven't got a clue. I'm very selective about what I let into my head. So I don't know. Yeah, sorry about that.
No. Well, it's just interesting because he's basically, he's already done it. He went up to 22,000 feet floating up with balloons.
Wow.
But one of the things he was doing is a breathing technique that may be worth you having a look at. I think he was offloading a lot of the CO2, but I didn't quite understand exactly what he was doing to keep his oxygen levels high. But I thought that was a really interesting, real world, real timely, millions and millions of views, and breathwork's being used right there.
Yeah, this is kind of an anomaly as well. If somebody is hyperventilating going up into altitude, the problem with the hyperventilation is the loss of carbon dioxide because blood vessels constrict. Mm-hmm. And there is a left shift of the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. And all that means is that with hyperventilation and loss of CO2, the red blood cells don't release oxygen so readily to the tissues. So if you hyperventilate, you will show a decent SpO2.
Yeah.
But the question ask
is... in his video, he took a oximeter up with him in the plane when he was training. And he was doing these breathing exercises and breath hold exercises, and he had his oximeter on, and everyone said, "Oh, you're a magician," and it's a false reading. So he put it on the pilot, and he put it on the cameraman, and then put it back on himself. But yeah, Will's question was an interesting one.
Yeah, it's totally. And then if you look at the work of the Italian cardiologist Bernardi, and he said, well, with his patients coming in with chronic heart failure, and they also tested this with individuals going up into Kilimanjaro at a height of 5,000 meters, which is about 17,000 feet. Mm. So not all 22,000 feet, 17,000 feet, but their blood oxygen saturation at 17,000 feet was 80%, which is severe hypoxia.
Yeah,
you got the individuals to simply have their hands either side of their lower ribs and breathe to 6 breaths per minute. No hyperventilation, just slow down the cadence to 6 breaths per minute to increase alveolar ventilation, and their blood oxygen saturation increased from 80% to 89%. And so I think there's different breathing techniques, and I know with the Wim Hof technique going up as well, Kilimanjaro, and his group was well able to ascend it with hyperventilation. And then when I'm thinking about hyperventilation, I was thinking, it's working, but how is it working? I don't know. It's weird.
Look, it's a rabbit hole, all right. I know there's a book I'm reading, Scott Carney or someone like that, where he's talking about that. It's something about the swinging back and forward of your body thinking it's in trouble. Like with the Wim Hof, you push it all out, then you hold it all in, and I think Nestor talks about it a bit, where your body might think it's dying, so it's giving you every little bit. But I love the idea that has the test been done to go up that high with the cadence breath? I mean, maybe. That's Nestor also talks about that after he finished, what did he do? He taped his nose shut for a week or something like that. But then when the other side came back, is he was still doing the slow in, slow out, and performing as you aim to get the athletes to do an oxygen advantage, which we want to do too. And one of the ways we've been trialing it, I don't know what you're going to say to this, is I'm quite a fan of hopping in not ice water, but cold water. I like the idea of challenging my body. I've read some studies that it attacks the bad fats, and I'm all into that. But I try to now just breathe 5.5 in, 5.5 out. And what Gareth and I realized is there's something mental resilience about fighting the need to with just
Yes.
saying to yourself, I'm going to go in, I'm going to keep this 5.5 in, and I wonder what's happening inside us. I mean, we've had many hours conversation about it, but it's going to be interesting to, because one of the ways we've been thinking about getting our rugby players to hop in cold, but to maintain calm and to show them you can access calm. Like Wim would say, it's about the big breaths, but we're like only nasal, only calm, and do it when you're in the ice. Because if you can do it there, you can do it elsewhere. So
I think it's good. And it makes sense. I know I'm not a major practicer of ice baths. I've done a few. I've done them through XBT. I always surrendered to the ice bath. I think if I tried to fight it, I wouldn't have lasted. I surrendered into it. And by surrendering into it, I breathe in through my nose, bring a feeling of relaxation throughout the body, that I'm not just in my head, but I'm dispersing throughout the body. And I slow down the breath to 5.5 or 6 breaths per minute. And it has helped enormously. Because throughout our evolution, whenever we got stressed, it was always synonymous with fast upper chest breathing. So fast upper chest breathing and stress go together. Now, if you're in a state of stress, but if you start slowing down your breathing, the feedback of the slow breathing to the brain automatically thinks, well, this person is not in stress now because they are slow breathing. So automatically there's a sense of calm brought in. When we hyperventilate, pain thresholds lower and pain perception increases. That could be a slight issue with hyperventilation in something like an ice bath, because you're going into that state, the central nervous system is getting excited, pain perception is increasing, and you're going to feel it stronger. And I suppose we need to consider even females. Something as a man I've completely kind of overlooked or ignored or stuck in my own silo for so many years. Even though 50% of our students coming in were females, the monthly cycle, days 10 to days 22 during the luteal phase, post-ovulation, that progesterone increases, and the changes and fluctuations of progesterone, which is a respiratory stimulant, carbon dioxide levels drop by 25% or up to 25%. And as a result, this can increase pain and fatigue and panic. So I'm just saying, in terms of the whole, with the female, so you can imagine female athletes, and if they don't have very good breathing going into that phase of the cycle, well, the cycle is going to really impact them. So we want to try and improve the buffer, in terms of improving their everyday breathing, so that when there is an increase of progesterone, that their breathing increases, but it doesn't increase as proportionately to what it normally would. So this is all where breath is, and I suppose it's confusing then for the layperson listening in, because they're asking, well, this guy is saying this and this guy is saying this, so what's the truth? I think the only way is practice and see. Practice. See what's for you.
And I mean, where we sit with the Manava is that if you don't know either, 5.5 or around there is a good neutral. And would you'd agree with that, Patrick, right? Like you can be any type of person. And if that's what I'm saying to a lot of people, at least bring it down to somewhere close to there. Because if you're up at the 20 mark, stand by for dramas,
Yeah. What I would say, Will, is that it's not that we want our breathing every day to be down to 5.5, but it's when we set aside 10 minutes or 20 minutes during the day and to slow down the respiratory rate to between 4.5 and 6.5 breaths per minute. So 5.5, 6 breaths is a very nice center there. And probably that's the rate that will apply most to most people. But I'd also say to people is that when you're doing it, make sure that you are doing it in and out through your nose. And also when you're slowing down your rate to 6 breaths per minute, don't hear your breathing. So because people will often, they will slow down the respiratory rate, but in the process, the tidal volume, which is the size of each breath, it increases disproportionately, and that can cause hyperventilation. And I always use the acronym like light, slow, and deep. Light is about the biochemistry. Slow is about the pace or resonance of the breath. And deep is about using the diaphragm, with amplitude of the diaphragm. So you could have your students with their hands either side of their lower ribs, the two lower ribs. And as they breathe in, their ribs are gently moving out. And as they breathe out, the ribs are gently moving in. And then we are timing it. So you're breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just continuing with that. Yeah. And for getting out of our heads. And I also, part of the reason for mental health issues is because of social media and mobile phones, because it's almost a technology. If you think of the people, I remember listening to an interview going back a few years ago, and he looked at the fashion industry, and these are not my words, so not any of the listeners to start coming down my throat as a result of it. He looked at the fashion industry and he says, why are the models in the fashion industry typically very skinny? If you look at the young female models, they're very, very thin. And he says, men don't typically like I'm like as a man and any red-blooded man, we like a woman with curves. But why is it in the model industry that the model industry has went for very, very thin women? And he said, because predominantly the model industry is the creators and designers are often homosexual men. So their preferences have filtered down through the industry. And that's why, and this is his take on it. Now, then you look at social media and individuals who are the creators and founders of platforms. They're typically asexual. They're typically male. They're recluses. And they're nerds. And it might be just a coincidence, but I've seen too many youngsters that spend their days watching social media, playing video games. And I've watched them over a number of years, and they typically have turned into asexual, recluses, and nerds. Now, I don't know if the question was it the social media and the video games which changed their psyche, or was it that they were prone to that anyway and they were drawn to social media? But I think there's a feedback loop. And that's why I think sports is so vitally important for kids, because we're able to bring them a balance. And the other thing is, we have a society now that we're afraid to criticize. Everything is, oh, great job, you've done a wonderful job there. So kids are learning this idea that everything I do, no matter how I perform, everything is brilliant and wonderful. And then we go out into the big bad world at 18 or 20 or 25 years of age, and we start to realize that everything isn't wonderful, that we get knocks, that we experience downs, but we're not able to cope with them if we haven't been subjected to falls throughout our lifetime. So this is where sports comes in, because you're going to lose games, you're going to win games. You're going to have the triumphs, and you're going to have the disappointments. There's times you're going to be not chosen, you're going to be stuck on the bench, and there's times that you are going to be out there. And it's almost that sports is reflective of modern life, it's a great preparation. And I think it's tremendous. And I do have something I'm very negative towards, even though we use social media as a business, because we have to. There's only, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
I'm very negative towards the use of it. I'm very negative towards the whole consumption of time by big multinational companies. Yeah. I don't give 2 hours of my time every day to any social media. Absolutely no way in hell. And people give out to me, they send me messages on Instagram, and it might be 3 or 4 days or even a week later before I have answered them. And that's the way it is, because I think the youngsters have to realize, and the kids in school, your time is precious. Don't give your time away to these platforms, because their motive is sinister. Their motive is all about share price. And if they can hold children and teenagers and adults on their platform for a period of time, that's driving. That's good for their business, but it's not good for the mental health of the user. And why does this tie in with breathing? Well, stress and breathing are interlinked. There's such a bi-directional relationship there. And what I want to do with the breath is, As opposed to the user surrendering all of their attention outwards, stuck with their head looking into a phone, I want to get them to bring their attention inwards. Because your breath is that constant, and it's always with us. And regardless of the situation that's happening on the outside, you can always tune into your breathing. But the time to tune into the breath is not when a situation happens. The time to tune into the breath is now. When things are going fairly okay, make it a habit of bringing your attention out of the mind onto the breath, creating some stillness between thoughts, and gently slowing down the breath to tell the body and mind that everything is okay. And then when a situation happens, you can bring your attention inwards and everything is okay. And yeah, it doesn't happen as perfect as that, but it's a good start.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Sweet. So we're still here doing coffee. That's the end of the podcast now. Hope everyone enjoyed that. I'm sure, there'll be lots of takeaways. We do this differently now. When we record a podcast, we do the intro, outro after, so we're able to give a bit more of an informed, how was it? I know when we did this podcast though, Gareth, with Patrick, you were buzzed at you'd obviously, I think is it fair to say you came across him when I gave you a call that day and I was like, hey, I'm exploring this Oxygen Advantage training, and you were like, for me, you represent someone who doesn't pull the trigger hypothetically until they're happy and they understand. Yep. So you're like, hey, I'll check him out before you go down the guru route, And you called me back after some research and it was cool. He's looking to,
Yeah, due diligence is something that in the strength industry that I've been in for a while. You want to see, you get to see a lot of false prophets and false gurus out there on the interwebs. Everyone's a YouTube expert, and it was refreshing to come across somebody who was so passionate about the science. The science of breathing isn't sexy. It just isn't. But somebody to be so invested into it after obviously discovering that he was a dysfunctional breather himself, childhood asthmatic and that kind of thing, to spend his entire life working on this business was pretty amazing. And we also spoke to a medical professional as well. We didn't really do a podcast, but he does get referenced by Patrick quite a bit. And these guys in the medical professions that are talking about breathing have been talking about it for 20 to 30 years. Again, just blows my mind. And that the medical profession as a whole discount breathing as a remedy to anything. Again, that's what I found quite challenging, and I did bring that up with James as well in our next podcast that you'll hear. It was interesting to me that such a simple thing is so the medical profession just aren't interested in that fix, because you can go down the conspiracy big pharma rabbit hole
or the laziness hole.
Or the laziness,
and let's not kid ourselves. If you're really good at one skill, that means you're not good at most others. And breathing is definitely one of those things that's been overlooked. Okay, team, we'll wrap it up here. You can visit us on www.manavabreathing.com. Just a quick note, Gareth is the Master Instructor of Oxygen Advantage in New Zealand, so that's what's changed since we first talked to Patrick.
Breathing yoga.
Half of the podcast was about our podcast, and the other half was about what would it look like to get a local person here to be the top dog, and so that's who you've been hearing, the top dog talking, and it's a really awesome space for us and a growing space as the rain moves in. Wrapping up here, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you on the next podcast with James Nestor. Breathe, the book that swept the world.
Yeah.
Awesome. Catch you soon.